The frost hadn't yet broken when the girl stepped barefoot into the alley behind the saloon, her breath little ghosts that vanished before they touched the ground. Her nightdress, thin and torn at the hem, clung to her legs like a second skin. She didn't shiver. She didn't cry. She just knelt where the dirt turned dark with blood and rain, and found the woman there, curled like something broken, half covered by the trash thrown out the night before. The woman's fingers twitched when the girl brushed the matted hair from her face. Her eyes didn't open. There was dried blood in the corner of her mouth. The color of her skin had taken on the gray of cold earth. The girl touched her cheek, gently at first, then harder. The woman moaned low, just enough to prove she was still tethered to this side of dying. "My struggling daddy needs you," the girl said as she took the woman's hand from the dirt she slept in. The hand was rough and bleeding at the knuckles, cold as creek stone. The girl tried to pull her up, but the woman's weight was all dead things, too heavy for a child's arms. Still, the girl didn't stop. She hooked her tiny hands beneath the woman's armpits and grunted as she tugged, dragging her a few inches from the slop and rot that coated the back lot of the saloon. A mule brayed in the distance. Somewhere a shutter slammed in the wind. No one came to help. The woman's name was Lenora, though no one in Rattler's Ridge had spoken it in months. Folks had called her Lena when she stitched fine collars for the preacher's wife before her shop burned down. Later, they called her Whore, or worse, after she started working the bar for coins too dirty for daylight. Now, they didn't call her anything at all. They just stepped over her. Behind the girl, the saloon loomed like a fat, laughing man, belching out the stink of gin and ash. Inside, music still clattered from a broken piano. But out here, under the last gray breath of night, only the wind spoke. Lenora stirred again, coughing blood into the dirt. Her eyes flicked open blue, cracked with red. She saw the girl and flinched, tried to pull away. The girl shook her head. "Don't, please." Her voice was barely more than a breath. "You're the only one left." Lenora's mouth opened like she might speak, but nothing came out. Just a rattle in her chest, and a string of tears that she hadn't asked for. The girl reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a crust of bread, half-eaten. She offered it without a word. Lenora stared at it, stared at the girl. Then slowly, with fingers that barely worked, she took it. It wasn't kindness that passed between them. It was need, pure and aching. The girl waited until Lenora swallowed. Then she stood, legs shaking, and bent her back like a mule again. She wrapped one arm around Lenora's ribs and pulled. "Come on," she whispered. "Daddy don't know I'm gone, but he don't move much no more. Just sits in his chair and looks out the window, like he's waiting to be buried." Lenora didn't answer, but she moved. Bit by bit, they left the alley behind. Rattler's Ridge wasn't a town. It was a graveyard with a whiskey habit. 32 buildings in total, most of them rotting from the inside out. There were no churches, no schools, just a well that ran dry in August and a general store that only opened when the stage came through. Men here worked cattle or killed each other, sometimes both. Women cooked, cleaned, and died early. No one stayed long unless they'd lost something they couldn't afford to find. As the girl and Lenora stumbled down the main road, shutters creaked open. Eyes peeked from behind curtains. No one stepped outside. A dog barked once. Then silence again. They walked past the smithy, where iron rusted on the racks. Past the undertaker's, where the front door was always ajar. Past the house with the green roof, the one the girl came from. The porch sagged like a man who'd been punched too many times. A single chair sat by the window. Empty. "Not yet," the girl said, as if reading a question in Lenora's eyes. "I can't bring you there till you're better. He won't speak if he sees you like this. Might not speak at all." They turned down a narrow trail that bled into the woods. Roots curled across the path, like sleeping snakes. The girl led with quiet determination, eyes locked forward, teeth clenched like she was holding something back. Lenora stumbled again and collapsed against a pine. She shook, not from fear or pain, but from a place deeper, colder. Something scraped hollow. She was all bone and bruises. Her dress, torn in 3 places, still held the handprint of the saloon keeper, who had dragged her behind the building 2 nights ago. "You got a name?" the girl asked. Lenora blinked, then nodded. "Lenora," she rasped. The girl repeated it, softly. "Lenora," like she was adding it to a list of things worth remembering. They reached a shack by the edge of the creek, a trapper's cabin long since abandoned. The roof sagged, but the walls still held. A pile of furs in the corner smelled of dust and pine. The girl led Lenora inside, laid her down slow. "Rest. I'll bring water. Then I'll come back." Lenora's eyes widened, fear flaring. "I won't leave," the girl added quickly. "Not for good. Just gotta check Daddy's still breathing." Lenora tried to nod. Couldn't. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. The girl turned at the door. For the first time, her small face showed its age. Not child, not woman. Just something in between, carved from need. "They said you bit him," she whispered. "The man at the saloon." Lenora looked away. The girl stepped outside. The door creaked shut behind her. Inside the cabin, Lenora stared at the rafters. Her chest rose slow. She touched her stomach, then her ribs, feeling each one like a stone in a dry riverbed. Outside, the sky began to shift, first gray, then gold. Rattler's Ridge would wake soon. Men would spit. Women would scrub. The saloon would open its mouth and start swallowing folk all over again. But in a pine cabin by the creek, two things breathed, one broken, one waiting. And the wind carried a girl's words through the trees, soft and strange like a prayer spoken backwards. "My struggling daddy needs you." The cabin at the end of the road didn't look like much. A crooked chimney, a roof stitched in rusted tin, and fences that leaned like they'd given up. The woods crept close to it, pine and shadow swallowing the path that led there. Folks said no one went near unless they had ghosts of their own. The girl didn't hesitate. She pulled Lenora with all the strength her small arms could summon. The woman could barely walk, each step a breath away from collapse. They followed a deer path, narrow and winding, where roots clawed at their feet and thorns tore at their clothes. Wind whispered through the trees, like it knew their names, and pitied them. By the time the clearing appeared, Lenora was more carried than walking. Her lips were cracked, her skin wax pale, and her breathing shallow. The girl didn't cry, not once, but her face had gone blank in that strange, dangerous way that only children who've seen too much wear like armor. The porch creaked when they stepped onto it. Lenora's knees buckled. She slumped against the rail, blood soaking the side of her dress. The girl stood straight, chin lifted toward the door like she was about to speak to God himself. A moment later, the door opened. Harlan Cage stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, boots planted like roots. He didn't say a word. He never did. His face looked carved from bark, lined deep, one side scarred like old lightning. Gray stubble covered his jaw, and his coat hung from his shoulders like it had never belonged to him in the first place. His eyes, though, that's what folks remembered. Cold, distant, thundercloud eyes that never quite left the storm behind. He looked at Lenora first. The blood, the dirt, her body slumped like a thrown-out thing. Then he looked at the girl. She didn't flinch. He kept the rifle in his hand, but stepped aside, opened the door. Lenora didn't move. She had nothing left. The girl tugged at her, but her strength had run dry. Without a word, Harlan stepped forward, knelt, and lifted Lenora into his arms like she weighed less than the rifle he carried. She didn't stir. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and old leather. There was no warmth in it beyond the fire in the hearth, which cracked low like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Harlan laid Lenora on a cot near the stove, covered her with a patched wool blanket, and turned away. The girl watched him, silent. Finally she spoke. Her voice was dry as dust. "He don't eat no more. He just stares. I thought maybe you'd know how to wake a man like that." Harlan looked at her, his mouth twitching like a thought nearly escaped. Then he turned to the window and said nothing. She stayed that night on the floor near Lenora, wrapped in an old horse blanket. Harlan didn't stop her, just brought out bread from a tin box and set it near the cot, a jar of water beside it. Then he sat by the fire, facing the flame like it held all the answers he wasn't asking for. In the morning, the girl was gone. Lenora woke with a scream caught in her throat. She sat up too fast, gasping, eyes wide like she'd forgotten where the sky was. The bread sat untouched beside her, still warm. She swung her legs off the cot. The floor creaked beneath her bare feet. Every bone in her body felt stitched together wrong. She found the door, gripped the frame, and stepped outside. The cabin yard was empty. Pines swayed. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Behind the coop, Harlan split wood with a rhythm that looked more like punishment than labor. He didn't look up when she limped out. Didn't stop. Lenora stood a long moment, then turned and started walking. She made it to the edge of the clearing before her knees gave out. He didn't run to her, just watched. Then, finally, he walked over, picked her up again, and brought her back. That night, she ate the bread. On the third day, she fed the chickens. He didn't thank her. He didn't speak. But when she stepped into the coop that morning, she found a pair of worn boots beside the door. Not new, but stitched carefully, cleaned, her size. She said nothing, but her fingers lingered on them before she slid them on. That evening, they sat at the fire together. Not close, not speaking, just there, breathing the same smoke, warming hands made of different histories. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. Noticed the way he flinched when the wind hit the chimney, just right, and made it whistle like a far-off train. The way he never faced the window after dark. How he touched the edge of his rifle before sleep, like it was a promise. She didn't ask. He wouldn't answer. The girl came back on the fourth morning. Her dress was muddied, her feet blistered. Lenora rushed to her, kneeling, touching her face, searching for bruises. The girl shook her head. He's still sitting, she said. Didn't even ask where I went. Harlan listened from the porch, eyes lowered. He said nothing. But that night, when the girl curled into the cot beside Lenora, there were 3 plates on the table instead of 2. On the 5th day, Lenora found Harlan outside, mending the fence. She picked up the second hammer without asking. By sundown, half the slats were new. They didn't speak, but at one point, their hands brushed. He didn't flinch. Neither did she. The girl sang softly that evening, a lullaby with no name, just hums and half-words passed down through blood. Lenora brushed her hair by lantern light. Harlan carved something on the porch rail with his knife. A star. Rough but clear. The next morning, the coop door was fixed. The fire burned stronger. Lenora swept the floors. Harlan chopped wood without anger. Silence remained between them, but it was a different silence now. Not the kind that buried you, but the kind that let things grow if you waited long enough. When the girl returned from her father's house again, there was a faint light in her eyes. No better news, but less despair in her bones. He looked at me, she said. First time in weeks. Didn't say nothing. Just looked. That night, Harlan placed another blanket on the cot. Lenora picked up the rifle from beside the fire, checked it, handed it back to him. He nodded. It wasn't a conversation. It was something more. Something old. A language made of motion, scars, and breath. The chickens clucked softly in the dark. The wind howled through the trees, but didn't break anything. In the heart of the woods, in a cabin long forgotten by the world, 3 souls sat near firelight. No one spoke, but they were, all 3 of them, finally heard. By mid-autumn, the frost had begun to retreat from the mornings, and with each passing day, Lenora stood a little taller in her bones. She no longer moved like something barely clinging to breath. Her hands, once cracked and shaking, now sewed with precision, needles dancing through old cloth like memory. The girl sat at her feet, small fingers clumsy, eyes sharp. This stitch here, Lenora murmured, guiding the needle through muslin, is for strength. You pull it tight, it won't break easy. You sew like this when you love the thing you're holding together. The girl looked up. Did your mama teach you? Lenora paused, smiled faintly. No, I taught myself. Mama died before I could even thread a needle. By the firelight, the sound of sewing mingled with humming. Lenora taught the girl songs from before the fire took her shop. Old tunes with no home, just rhythm. The kind of songs that didn't mind being forgotten. But nothing stayed hidden in Rattler's Ridge for long. By the time the first snow dusted the pines, Whispers had slithered their way through the saloon, the blacksmith's yard, and the dry goods store. "The dirt woman's in Cade's house," they said. "She feeds his chickens, sings to that drunk's daughter like she's her own. No man stays quiet that long unless he's hiding sin." The words didn't carry on the wind. They crawled, patient and sharp, until they found ears eager to judge. One afternoon, Sheriff Ruck rode up to Harlan's cabin on a horse that looked more beast than mount. The man sat tall in the saddle, his coat still bearing the faded gray of his old allegiance. A saber hung from his hip, though he hadn't drawn it in years. His eyes were blue and bitter, like cold gin left too long in the bottle. Harlan stepped onto the porch, hands empty, face unreadable. "You best remember," the sheriff said, voice flat, "the world don't change just 'cause you took a stray in." Harlan didn't blink. "She's a saloon woman," Ruck continued, "and the girl ain't yours. This town's got its ways. Been that way since before either of us buried our boys." Harlan leaned against the post, silent. Ruck's jaw twitched. "You gonna make trouble, Cade?" "No," Harlan said, voice low and cracked, like it hadn't been used in weeks. "You'll do that just fine without me." Ruck narrowed his eyes, then turned his horse and disappeared into the trees. That night, Harlan didn't eat. He sat in the dark long after the fire died. Lenora found him gone the next morning. She followed the trail he left behind, prints in frost, wide and heavy. She knew where he was going before she saw the clearing. The grave was nothing more than a wooden cross leaning beside a crooked tree. 2 names carved into it. The wood was weather-worn. His hands had carved those letters once, fingers raw and trembling. She could see the ghost of that moment in the way he knelt, head bowed, hat in hand, not speaking. She didn't step closer, just watched. And when he finally stood, she turned back to the path before he saw her. That night, as the girl slept by the fire, Harlan stood at the window and whispered a name. Not Lenora's, a different one. The kind of name a man speaks only when no one is meant to hear. Behind him, Lenora stirred, but she didn't speak. The next day, she found the courage to ask, "Who did you lose?" Harlan looked at her like she'd asked something sacred, something no one had dared to ask in years. "My son," he said, voice barely there. "And his mama." He didn't offer more. She didn't push. But from that day forward, something softened. The way he handed her tools. The way his shadow no longer flinched beside hers. Then came the night the saloon keeper spat blood and malice into the town's ear. "She bit me," he slurred, holding court with half a bottle of rye and a room full of rusted men. "And now she's shacked up with that goddamn ghost at the edge of the woods." Laughter, cruel and easy, filled the air. "If Cade won't throw her out, we'll drag her out ourselves." No one stopped him. No one ever did. They came just before midnight. A dozen men, most drunk, some worse, faces shadowed under wide brims, eyes lit with firelight and something meaner than liquor. They carried torches, ropes, shovels, the kind of things used when law becomes suggestion. But Harlan was already waiting. He stood on the porch, coat buttoned, boots planted firm, his rifle nowhere in sight. Just his body, just his eyes. The firelight reflected in the scar across his cheek, turning it into a river of old pain. The men stopped 10 paces from the fence. The saloon keeper stepped forward, lips curled. "You really gonna let trash like her stink up this mountain, Cade?" Harlan said nothing. The man spat. "You forget what she is." Still no reply. The girl stepped onto the porch then, small fingers reaching up to wrap around Harlan's calloused hand. She didn't hide. She just stood beside him like that was where she belonged. Behind them, Lenora stood in the doorway. No tears, no fear, just a quiet, defiant dignity that made her look taller than the house itself. "She ain't dirt," Harlan said, voice raw and thick. "She's the only thing here still growing." The silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. A torch wavered. The saloon keeper scoffed. "You gonna lie with her next, Cade? Raise that girl like she's your own." Harlan's hand didn't move. His face didn't change. But the girl tugged on his coat and whispered, "He already is." That was all it took. Some of the men turned their eyes to the ground. One dropped his torch in the snow. Another muttered something about home, about needing to piss, about nothing. And then they left. One by one, they disappeared back into the trees, the firelight shrinking behind them. The saloon keeper lingered, eyes narrow, jaw clenched. But he knew when a fight had turned to ash. He spit once more, for pride, and walked away. Only the wind stayed behind, rustling through the bare branches like applause. Back inside, the girl climbed onto the cot and curled into herself. Lenora stood at the window for a long time, watching the flames retreat into the dark. Harlan poured a measure of whiskey into a tin cup, handed it to her. She drank without flinching. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say, only something left to build. The wind died the moment the last torch was dropped. A hush fell over the clearing like a held breath, finally exhaled. The trees no longer trembled. The shadows retreated, curling back into the woods. And the men, who had come to deliver judgment, found themselves shrinking beneath the weight of their own silence. Sheriff Ruck sat stiff in his saddle, hands unmoving on the reins. His eyes met Harlan's across the flickering dark, not as lawman to settler, but man to man. Something passed between them then. Not peace, not forgiveness, but understanding, worn down and quiet. Without a word, the sheriff turned his horse and rode back into the trees, his coat trailing like smoke behind him. Behind the cabin door, Lenora stood still as the wood around her. One hand gripped a dull knife she'd found in the kitchen drawer, knuckles white. Her breath was caught just behind her teeth. She'd waited for glass to break, for fists, for screams. But nothing came, only the slow creak of boots on the porch. Then the door opened, gentle, like it wasn't sure it belonged to him anymore. Harlan stepped in and met her eyes. "You sleep inside now," he said, voice low worn. "Door's yours too." She let the knife fall. It landed soft against the floor, like even it had decided the fight was over. That night, none of them slept. Not out of fear, but because something had shifted, something invisible and sacred. In the days that followed, the world outside kept turning. But inside the cabin, a different kind of time settled in, quieter, patient, slow like thawed snow sliding off the roof. Lenora swept the floor every morning, not because it needed it, but because the sound soothed her. She stitched by firelight again, not corsets or fine silk, just simple things. The girl brought her torn dresses and buttonless blouses and called them new once they passed through Lenora's hands. One day, a parcel arrived from the dry goods store. A bolt of blue cotton, the color of spring skies before thunder. No name on the note, just the fabric folded neat. Lenora made the girl a dress from it. Spent 2 full days with her head bowed, fingers nimble and focused. When it was done, the girl spun in slow circles by the creek, grinning wide, skirt catching the breeze like it wanted to fly. Harlan watched from the porch, whittling a branch with the same care she sewed with. It was the first thing he'd carved in years that wasn't shaped like a weapon. He didn't tell them what it would be, just kept sanding, smoothing, shaving. By the next week, a swing hung from the lone birch at the edge of the clearing. The girl squealed the first time she climbed on. Lenora pushed her gently, laughter spilling from her chest in sudden bursts, raw and beautiful. And Harlan, he smiled. Just a flicker, but enough. The chickens kept laying. The roof kept leaking near the stove, and no one ever quite fixed it. But the cabin began to hum with life. Bread baking, water boiling, the quiet conversations that didn't need many words. One morning, as snow whispered back onto the earth, Harlan took down the rifle from its place above the hearth. He didn't polish it, just placed it in the storage trunk, shut the lid, and walked away. The girl drew pictures in the dirt with sticks, 3 figures holding hands. A cabin behind them, a swing hanging from a tree. Lenora started writing again, small things, in scraps of paper tucked between the pages of old books. Harlan read them without asking. He left one beside her cup one evening with a circle drawn around a line that simply said, asterisk, even silence can make a home. Asterisk. By spring, no one in town talked about them anymore. Rattler's Ridge had found other fires to whisper around. The saloon keeper lost business. Sheriff Ruck started spending his days at the edge of town, carving toy soldiers for a nephew long dead. Time didn't fix anything. It didn't have to. It just softened the sharp edges, wore down the grief until it was manageable, livable. The girl planted wildflowers by the porch steps, said she didn't know their names, but they looked like they belonged. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, the three of them sat on the porch, Lenora mending a sleeve. The girl curled up between them, head resting against Harlan's leg. She hummed an old tune, something half-remembered from a mother who never sang it. The breeze caught it and carried it through the trees, like it had always lived there. Harlan watched the horizon as if waiting for something. Not dread this time, just watching. Lenora looked over at him, needle paused midair. "You thinking about her?" she asked, softly. He didn't answer right away. "Then I was. But it's not the same kind of ache anymore." She nodded. The girl stirred. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the post beside Harlan's chair. He leaned back, running his fingers over the smooth wood. "A name," he said, carved deep into the beam, rough but steady, home. The girl traced the letters with her finger. The wind picked up then, not sharp but gentle, like a hand brushing back hair. It stirred the flowers, moved through the cabin's eaves. And in that moment, the quiet was different. Not the kind that empties a place, but the kind that fills it. Three figures sat on a porch that once belonged to a ghost. A name carved into wood. Wind that knew them now, and carried it forward. Silence. But it wasn't empty.